it's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job.
Hi, this is Guy Wallace, and this is the Pursuing Performance Podcast. Welcome.
Imagine spending 84 days, like almost 3 full months, training a single call center employee.
Which is just a massive chunk of time and resources.
Right, so you pay their salary, you pay the instructors, you pull them completely off the floor. And then day 85 hits.
The moment of truth.
Yeah, they take their very first live call, and they immediately breach a state compliance law. So they have to be fired on the spot.
Oh man, that is just brutal.
It really is. And that massive squandering of time and money was the actual reality, well, at least until they completely radically re-engineered how human beings learn on the job.
I mean, it highlights a staggering failure in how organizations traditionally approach learning, right? We tend to view training as this inherently positive, unquestionable good.
Like it's just a universally great thing to do.
Exactly. But when you apply rigorous business metrics to it, you realize a massive percentage of corporate training is the absolute definition of wasted shareholder equity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for today's deep dive is to decode the secret to effective, high-stakes learning and training.
And we have a really fantastic stack of highly specialized sources for this. We're pulling from Guy W. Wallace's work, looking at excerpts from his book, Aligning and Architecting Performance-Based L&D.
Yeah, alongside transcripts from a couple of his masterclass webinars that cover, honestly, decades of his methodology. We want to figure out how to stop wasting your time on useless information.
Right, and start engineering learning that drives actual, measurable, real-world performance.
Because corporate training often feels like, being forced to read the entire dictionary just to learn how to write a simple email.
That is a perfect way to put it. The core philosophy underlying all of Wallace's source material is that learning cannot be measured by generic butts in seats metrics, or like those post-course smile sheets.
Oh yeah, those feedback forms where everyone just rates it a 5 so they can leave the room.
Exactly. Learning has to be a strict business decision. Every hour you spend training is an investment of capital. And if that investment isn't moving a specific financial needle, it is a failure of leadership.
So let's look at why there is such a massive disconnect between what people are taught and what they actually need to do on the job. Because it seems to start with a fundamental misdiagnosis of the problem itself.
Well, the sources reference a concept from the late Geary A. Rumler called CBIs.
Critical business issues, right?
Right. These are the specific high-stakes problems or strategic opportunities an enterprise is facing. We're talking about high-risk, high-reward scenarios here.
Like launching a totally new product line or migrating to a new global software system or, keeping an oil pipeline from shutting down.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of targeting those incredibly complex critical business issues, learning and development departments often gravitate toward the exact opposite.
They go after the low-hanging fruit.
Yes. Programs with mass appeal like general communication skills, generic time management courses, basic leadership seminars.
And they do that because it's easy to deploy. Right? It looks fantastic on an activity report. You can easily get 1,000 people into a virtual room for a time management seminar.
But the problem is these broad programs generate zero economic value add or EVA. They do not structurally change the P&L statement of the company.
Wow.
The sources argue aggressively that funding these low-stakes distractions is an outright abdication of a leader's fiduciary responsibility.
Wait, I have to push back on that a little bit. Isn't teaching something universally applicable like time management always a net positive for an organization?
How so?
Well, if you teach 1,000 employees how to better prioritize their inbox or, structure their calendar, the mechanism of the business should theoretically run smoother, shouldn't it?
What's fascinating here is that generic skills fail precisely because they lack an authentic context for application. The mechanism of managing time doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Okay, so it only exists in relation to a specific output.
Right. Time management for an R&D scientist developing a 5-year clinical trial requires entirely different tools, frameworks, and behaviors than time management for an inbound sales rep.
Oh, because the sales rep is fielding, 60 calls an hour and managing microsecond system latencies.
Exactly. So when you abstract the skill away from the specific output, you essentially leave it up to the individual learner to act as the translator.
Ah, I see. You teach them a generic matrix and then just expect them to figure out how to map that onto a highly specialized daily workflow.
And relying on the learner to do that translation is incredibly risky. If the stakes are low, maybe you can afford that inefficiency. But if the stakes are tied to a critical business issue,
Then hoping employees will just figure it out is organizational malpractice.
spot on. The sources insist that training absolutely must target specific, authentic outputs and tasks, not isolated generic behaviors.
That creates a massive bottleneck, though. If generic training is totally out, and every single initiative has to be rigorously tied to a critical business issue and a specific output, how do you evaluate the endless stream of requests that come in?
Because managers are constantly asking for new modules every time their team makes a mistake, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what is the filter?
The solution is an incredibly strict intake process. It acts as a filtration system. Before anyone even opens PowerPoint or starts drafting a curriculum, you have to answer the 6 W's.
Who is the target audience? What is the task performance being affected? Where will they apply it? When is the deadline? Why is this being requested now? And how is it going to be developed?
Right. But the surprising default stance during this intake process isn't to figure out how to build the course.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The default state is to actively refuse to build it at all.
Yes. When a request comes in, the default should always be to leave it to informal learning, which is just the natural process of figuring it out on the job, or to use a standalone job aid.
It's kind of like medical triage. We don't do open heart surgery if a Band-Aid works. And a job aid being a quick reference guide, an aviation checklist, or a regulated standard operating procedure in a pharmaceutical plant. Right.
Exactly. It's a tool you access in the moment of need. Job aids are vital because human memory is deeply fallible.
Especially in highly regulated environments. You don't want employees relying on what they vaguely remember from a seminar 3 months ago.
You want them reading the SOP step by step as they perform the action. Formal learning experiences where you actually pull someone away from their daily workflow to take a class should only be created if the environment absolutely demands a memorized performance response.
Meaning the situation moves too fast or is too dangerous to look up the answer. A firefighter in a burning building cannot pause to consult a PDF on thermal dynamics.
Right, they need a memorized performance response. A surgeon needs a memorized performance response.
But a mid-level manager writing quarterly performance reviews does not. They can just use a template.
Exactly. To enforce this discipline, Wallace details the use of gate review meetings with a project steering team. This team consists of key stakeholders, financial sponsors, and leadership.
And at the end of the very first gate review meeting, they are presented with a specific set of options for how to proceed.
And option 1, presented right to leadership, is always kill the effort.
Kill the effort. That is so blunt. I love it.
It's front and center because it deliberately forces the project champions to prove that the training makes financial and business sense before a single dollar is spent on development.
So if the training isn't tied to a critical business issue, or if a simple job aid would solve the problem, the project is terminated immediately.
Right. It prevents L&D from becoming a content factory that churns out modules nobody actually needs.
Okay, let's say a project survives that brutal kill the effort phase. You've successfully identified a critical business issue, and the employee absolutely must memorize this skill.
Now you run into a production issue. High stakes, highly specific training is notoriously expensive and slow to build.
Yeah, if we start from scratch with a blank slate every single time a new problem arises, we bankrupt the department. So how does Wallace solve that production bottleneck?
He solves it through the architecture of the content itself. It's a methodology he calls Curriculum Architecture Design, or CAD.
CAD, which operates exactly like object-oriented programming. You're building a library of reusable code blocks.
That is the perfect analogy.
So when a new business problem arises, you aren't writing software from scratch. You're just calling the right variables and assembling them into a new program.
Exactly. The framework Wallace uses relies on a 5-tier module inventory. Instead of building massive monolithic courses that can't be easily updated, you organize everything into highly manageable hierarchical components.
So the tiers break down from the overarching curriculum down to the event, which you can think of as the course itself, down to the module.
And then the lesson, and finally the instructional activity at the very bottom.
Meaning, if a compliance law changes, you don't have to scrap a 3-day course. You just surgically swap out one instructional activity at the bottom tier, and the update automatically cascades through any path that calls on that module.
Right. Standardizing these components creates a centralized inventory. This modularity radically reduces costs across development inventory, administration, deployment, and long-term maintenance.
The sources highlight a classic example of what happens when you don't have this architecture in place, right?
Yes, the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. When Wallace was consulting there, his team conducted an inventory of the existing training materials. They found 27 different 2-hour modules dedicated entirely to active listening.
Wait, 27? Every single department thought their specific flavor of active listening was completely unique, so they spent the money to build their own version from the ground up.
Exactly. By utilizing curriculum architecture design, you eliminate that massive, expensive redundancy. You build one incredibly robust module on active listening, place it in the shared inventory, and deploy it across the enterprise.
I'm looking at this structure, and there's a bit of a paradox here. We have this modular inventory, these shared code blocks of learning. But if I'm taking the exact same active listening module as someone in a totally different department, doesn't that inherently violate the rule we just established about keeping training context-specific?
It seems like it would, but it actually creates the exact opposite effect.
Doesn't standardizing the modules make the learning feel robotic and rigid for the individual?
No, because the components are modular, they allow for hyper-customization at the individual level through something called individual development planning guides.
Okay, so you don't customize the module itself, you customize the path.
Exactly. You sit down with your manager, look at the master menu of available modules, and you cherry-pick only the specific components you need based on your exact job assignment, your prior experience, and your current gaps in knowledge.
The sources use a manufacturing analogy for this that makes total sense. Automakers like Ford or General Motors don't invent a brand new brake system for every single car model they design.
Right. They share underlying chassis and braking components across different vehicles.
Which allows them to build a highly diverse fleet flexibly and efficiently. Curriculum architecture does the same thing for human performance. You share the parts to build unique paths.
Let's examine how those paths actually function in the real world, because the sources detail 3 drastically different examples. And these prove a crucial point: the architecture has to match the reality and the constraints of the specific job environment.
The first example takes us back to that Verizon inbound call center I mentioned at the start of the deep dive. This path was incredibly rigorous.
Right, it was a strict lockstep journey for new sales reps, entirely dictated by heavy state regulations. Every region had different complex laws governing what a representative could and could not say on a call.
And if an employee provided the wrong information, the company could face massive, immediate regulatory fines.
Because the enterprise had zero tolerance for regulatory failure, the learning path had to be entirely rigid. They designed the path with literal washout points, marked as traffic lights on the visual architecture.
So if a struggling learner wasn't grasping the compliance material by a certain benchmark, they were let go. It sounds harsh, but it saved the company from investing weeks of salary into an employee who was statistically guaranteed to cause a compliance breach.
And they also built in strategic W points. W stood for work. The training took place directly adjacent to the live call center floor.
Because inevitably there would be massive spikes in call volume, and managers would run in demanding that trainees get on the phones to help clear the queue.
Right, and previously, pulling a half-trained employee onto the floor was playing Russian roulette with state regulators. But the W points changed the dynamic.
Because they indicated exactly when a trainee had mastered enough specific modules to safely take a narrow category of calls, like basic billing inquiries, without violating any laws.
Exactly. It allowed the business to flex during volume spikes safely.
That is a perfect example of a strict, linear path. But then we look at the Eli Lilly clinical trials example. This was designed for a global process, and it functioned as a totally flexible guided menu.
Because employees in different countries wore completely different hats depending on local regulations and team sizes, you couldn't prescribe a single rigid path.
So local managers utilized those individual planning guides to construct customized journeys for their specific teams. My favorite detail from the Eli Lilly project is a brilliant piece of stakeholder management.
Oh, hiding the software modules.
Yes. They deliberately moved all the basic software modules, things like how to use Microsoft Word or Excel, to the very bottom of the visual path document.
Because they knew that if an executive sponsor looked at the top of the curriculum and saw Microsoft Word, they would immediately assume the entire project was a low-stakes waste of money and kill the effort.
Such a smart move. Finally, we have the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. This path was designed for supervisors who were repairing U.S. Navy warships during wartime. The stakes are quite literally life and death.
And they were facing a terrifying demographic cliff at the same time. The shipyard was dropping from a workforce that had an average of 28 years of experience down to a workforce with just 5 years of experience.
Wow. So they were bleeding veteran knowledge overnight.
Their learning path had to function as a critical bridge. It combined deep awareness, technical knowledge, and hands-on skills building. Crucially, they heavily utilized pre-tests.
Right. So if a supervisor transferring from a different shipyard already knew how to perform a specific task, they could test out of that module instantly and get straight to the floor where they were desperately needed.
It's all about adaptability.
It really is like navigating a video game. Sometimes you are in a strict linear tutorial where you fail if you step out of bounds, like Verizon. And other times you have an open world skill tree tailored to your specific character build, like Eli Lilly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these paths prove that an organization's tolerance for risk dictates the strictness of the learning path. High risk demands rigidity, while low risk allows for flexibility.
But to build these incredibly specific, risk-adjusted paths, you need highly accurate, granular data about what the job actually entails. How do you gather that data quickly without falling into analysis paralysis?
Wallace addresses this data bottleneck with the PACT process. PACT. It stands for Performance-Based, Accelerated, Customer or Stakeholder-Driven.
And the biggest revelation in the PACT process is the complete rejection of standard, round-robin individual interviews, which is wild because that's how everyone does it.
Right. In traditional instructional design, you interview person A on Monday, person B on Tuesday, and person C on Wednesday.
And invariably, person A disagrees with person C on how a critical task is performed.
Exactly. The instructional designer is then left in a vacuum, trying to synthesize conflicting data. This leads to massive rework, endless review cycles, and a final product that no one fully recognizes or agrees with.
To bypass that, the PACT process utilizes a 3-day facilitated group process. You lock the right people in a room and force them to hammer out the consensus together.
And the key to this entire methodology is who is sitting in that room. It cannot just be subject matter experts. It absolutely must be master performers.
That distinction is vital. A subject matter expert might know the underlying theory of a job inside and out, like a manager who performed the role brilliantly 5 years ago.
But a master performer is someone who is doing the job right now at an exemplary level, actively dealing with all the current realities, broken systems, and constraints of the daily workflow.
You bring these master performers together with subject matter experts and even novices. Because a novice remembers the exact pain points and confusing terminology of day one much better than a 20-year veteran does.
And the instructional designers run the meeting with a brilliant boundary-setting philosophy. We own the process, they own the content.
Meaning the designers facilitate the structure, they manage the templates, and they build the architecture. But the master performers dictate every single piece of content.
Yes, if the official company manual says a process takes 5 steps, but the master performer says it actually takes 10 steps to do it right, the designer writes down 10 steps.
Because the manual represents theory, but the master performer represents reality.
And placing these master performers in a room together leads to a critical diagnostic breakthrough. It allows the organization to differentiate between a deficiency of knowledge and a deficiency of environment.
Meaning, we have to determine if the employee is failing because they literally don't know how to do the job, or if they are failing because the physical or structural system around them is broken.
This defines the absolute limits of training. Training can only ever fix a deficiency of knowledge.
Right.
If an employee is failing because they have a deficiency of the environment,
Yeah.
the computer system crashes every hour, the lighting is terrible, or the supply chain constantly delivers the wrong parts, no amount of training will fix that root cause.
The sources highlight an incredible example of this involving the assembly of composite materials for military aircraft. The team had a 0% yield rate. They were failing on step 1 every single time.
And why? Because the engineering job orders consistently specified the wrong materials. You can't train an assembly worker to read a job order better if the job order itself is fundamentally flawed.
But here's the nuanced genius of having master performers driving the curriculum while training cannot fix the broken environment. The master performers know how to survive it.
Yes, they can share their undocumented workarounds. They teach the new employees the actual tricks of the trade, like who to call when the job order is wrong or how to double-check the composite materials before wasting $10,000 on a doomed assembly.
The training adapts to the reality of the flawed environment rather than pretending the flaws don't exist. So what does this all mean for you?
Well, Whether you're an independent learner trying to master a new highly technical field or a manager standing up a new team, do not rely solely on the official textbooks or the theoretical manuals.
Find the actual master performers. Get them in a room. Map out the real-world roadblocks, the hidden constraints, and the necessary workarounds first before you spend a single minute building a curriculum.
Because your time is your most valuable equity. By demanding strict alignment between what you are learning and the actual measurable performance outputs required by the environment, you bypass the theoretical fluff.
You shortcut your way to true operational competence. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've moved far away from the trap of generic butts in seats training and those low-hanging fruit initiatives.
We've embraced the fiduciary power of option one, kill the effort.
We've explored how modular curriculum architecture acts like object-oriented programming to drastically save money and time. And we've seen how to build rigorous, risk-adjusted training paths by trusting the reality of master performers over the theory of manuals.
It is a highly engineered, deeply pragmatic approach to human performance. It strips away the wishful thinking that plagued so much of corporate learning and replaces it with cold, hard business reality.
It really does. But it leaves me with one final provocative thought to ponder. If we rigorously filter all learning through this industrial methodology, if we only ever address high-stakes critical business issues where the cost of failure is severe and we completely kill the effort on everything else,
Yeah.
what hidden, brilliant innovations might we be missing? By systematically eliminating unstructured, playful, low-stakes learning from the enterprise, does engineering this level of ultra-efficiency accidentally kill the space for happy accidents?
That is the ultimate tension every evolving organization has to balance. Efficiency versus discovery.
Something to think about the next time you are handed a massive corporate training manual and told to start reading. Until next time.
It's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job. It's about performance.